And then we'll get back together again. Okay, that is the first activity because, first of all, communicating your research is so important. I know that for many of us, the research we do is very complicated. It does not result in clear findings or results. It does actually have a whole variety of different layers or levels to it, and it's not easy to communicate it simply and straightforwardly. However, we do live in a world where simple and straightforward messages are what is sometimes best understood. And I'm going to ask you to practice this again in a little while, because I think it is so important. So the communication, what is this research about, and who is your audience here, is absolutely vital. And of course, who is your audience will determine what kind of journal you're going to be aiming this particular piece of writing at. Okay, because if you want a wide audience to be able to read about your work within your own national context, you're probably not going to be writing first and foremost in an international research journal. You might want to do some interim publishing, which we'll talk about in a minute. But if you do want your research out there and you want people reading it internationally, you won't be publishing it in a national journal. Unless you're very, very lucky, it simply won't travel. It almost literally won't travel. Okay, so communication and audience is really important. But so too is that question about landscape. In my mind, you should be able to say, what is the landscape of teacher education research into which my work is going to fit? What's it going to contribute within my own institution, within my own area of work? And I think that is so valuable. We sort of forget in all this, trying to get our work out there in a big scale, big journals, big, peer-reviewed journals, etc., etc. We sometimes forget that disseminating things locally is enormously important. So how does the work contribute locally to your own institution, to MOFET, for example? How does it contribute nationally? What does it say about teacher education in Israel? And then again, internationally, how does it relate to the literature and the landscapes of teacher education internationally? So, for example, you could see from what I was saying this morning about teacher-educated development that, the MOFET agenda has been way ahead of international contexts for probably for decades. So it's an interesting example of how sometimes national contexts are well ahead of the international agendas. Okay, but you need to know about that, how it fits and how it doesn't. Okay, now I'm not going to ask you to do this activity, but if we had a bit more time, I would ask you to do this. So this is about building on existing research, and it's about what's sometimes called generativity. So in other words, generating, contributing new knowledge in teacher education. But how does your research in general, or this paper in particular, build on the literature of the field? Because out there is a whole, and by field I mean teacher education as a system, out there's a lot of literature on teacher education already. So are you doing something that has already been done? Now that's fine, provided it has a different new angle in it somewhere and somehow, but you need to know what has gone before. So one activity I've done with people before is to say 2 or 3 other researchers who've written in the same area as you, what would their names be? Okay, you don't have to do that now, but just think through that question. How does your work build on theirs? So what does your work add in terms of what's sometimes called the substantive, the central area of teacher education? What does it add? And then, who are the major theorists in your field? Now, if you are pitching your work at an international peer-reviewed journal, the normal expectation would be that your work has a theoretical or a conceptual framework. So broadly speaking, a conceptual framework would be a set of structuring ideas, which includes some key concepts from teacher education. And when people use that theoretical word, they usually mean that you're perhaps referring to a major theorist, or at least one, maybe two. So it might be a Vygotskian study, it might be a Foucauldian study, and so on. So a theoretical or a conceptual framework. But most journals would normally expect that there was some kind of sort of major positioning of the paper in the field, either conceptually or theoretically. Now, again, we're talking about peer-reviewed and international journals, so this wouldn't be a requirement for other types of journals necessarily. And it's not always a requirement for international peer-reviewed journals. It depends very much on what the paper is about, how it's structured, how it's crafted, etc., etc. So what I'm going to do is I'll run through the next 3 slides, which are about the editing process and the reviewing process. And then I'm going to stop and give you a space to talk to one another about what I've said and to see if there are any questions that you would like to raise. And those people who are reviewers, who review on journals, it would be really useful at this stage if you say, give your opinions and state what you're thinking about this. Okay, now in JET, so this is my particular journal, and as you said, the editor is Peter Gilroy. He doesn't use the automated system, the Scholar One system that I think some of you will be very familiar with, where you have to go online and then you have to tick all these boxes and then you have to click all of this and then, yes, I can see some people laughing. It's a nightmare. Peter Gilroy decides not to use this. He has a devotion to his work, which means that each article that comes into JET has a first screening, or what we call a first sort. So we literally sort out the articles. Now, I think most journals do this, even though they use the Scholar One system. But I'm not sure, and sometimes I hear stories from people which indicate that perhaps they don't do this, which is such a shame because it wastes time for the author. Okay.
I think sometimes the managing editor does.
The manager editing editor.
You don't even get beyond the person to the editor.
Right.
That's my experience.
Okay, yes. Okay, so we might have a managing editor, and I know on some of the electronic systems, like for the European Journal of Teacher Education, the electronic system does a kind of first sort, but it only does it on word length. So if you try to put in something that's over 7,000 words, the system just goes, no, not having this. So first sorting. Anyway, but this is what we do for JET. First of all, we say, is the article suitable for this journal? Now, JET has a really specific focus on teacher education, teaching education. How do you teach education courses? But we get lots of papers which are about school teaching. So they're about teaching children to understand algebra better, or teaching children to be very, very good at vowels and distinguishing between vowels when they learn English, age 5. Okay, now those might be really good articles, but they're not about teaching education. So straight away we sort of think, this is coming to the wrong journal. So we send it back straight away, or as soon as we can, to say, no, this isn't about teaching education, so it's not for our journal. But then the question raises in your mind, why did it come to our journal in the first place, however? Second thing, does it meet, JET, like all these journals, has specified remits: the focus, the style, the length, the format, and the referencing. And again, we get lots of articles that don't follow those things. Okay, so the articles are too long. It says round about 7,000 words, and you get an article that's 12,000 words long, or we once had one that was 22,000 words long. And we also had somebody emailing in to say, could we publish his entire PhD? It was only 75,000 words, and it was very good, basically. No. So does it meet those specified remits? Now, nobody's going to be too strict if you've used 1.5 line spacing and it's supposed to be double line spacing. But on the other hand, if all the references are in a different format, or the length is huge, or the length is tiny, or, you know, there's a kind of neglect of focus on style, then out it goes. Okay? Is the level of English good? Okay, so the level of academic English has to be good. If not, then it goes back, and people are asked to just style check the English, basically. Has the author checked the website for any sort of quirkiness around the journal? Now, one quirk about JET, for an example, is that Peter Gilroy does not like long strings of references. So you know how sometimes people will say, they give an idea, you know, say professional development in teacher education, and then they don't just give 2 references to that, or 3 even, they give 6, 7, 10, 12, you know, and it's about trying to say, I'm really clever, I know an awful lot, but JET guidelines specifically say, do not do this. You know, the style of the journal does not like this, but still people do it. It says, do not use footnotes, and still people will send in, last week I had an article that had 22 footnotes in it. So you think, is this person really writing for this journal specifically, or have they recycled something, you know?
There is a problem.
Yes.
As a reviewer, you're not sure what kind of exactly manuscript you are looking for.
Yes.
So I asked Peter Gilroy to send me at least 3 copies just to get a glimpse what kind of articles are accepted.
Yes. Yes, okay, so what kind of articles are accepted is the absolutely key thing here. And we'll come through to that in a minute, because you can check all of these things, but you still might not be quite clear about exactly what type of articles are accepted. Is the abstract clear and suitable in terms of the study it describes? So that, I mean, abstracts are so important. I know, again, some of our young researchers will do the abstract last, which is fine, good idea, but they don't really pay much attention to it. And I always say, remember, that's the only bit of your article that some people will be able to read without going into their university system. So they use that to screen, is this a good, is this article of interest to me? So it's got to be catchy. You know, it's not that we're trying to market things, but it's got to be good marketing, it's got to be good selling for your article, it's got to be accurate. And we use the abstracts to go through. If we're not sure about an article, we read the abstract. Usually that enables us to say yes or no on the first sort. If it doesn't, then I always read the introduction and the conclusion. If that still doesn't tell me enough, I'm beginning to raise some questions about the clarity of this person's writing. Because if I don't get enough information from abstract and introduction and conclusion, I'm starting to go, But we would then make, based on those kind of questions, we then make a decision. Does it go forward to the reviewing process, or does it go straight back to the author? And if we don't think an article is suitable, we try and not waste our reviewers' time, because we know how precious our reviewers' time is, and we don't want to waste the author's time, because we don't want to be sitting on that article for, 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, when somebody could put it to another journal. So it goes straight back. Okay? Yes?
What do you mean about style?
Style?
Yeah.
The whole way in which the article is written. So again, the sort of level of language. We're not looking for something that's written in a very straightforward, basic, very, very basic style, but on the other hand, we're not looking for the very complicated language that you might find, say, in some of the journals in my discipline, sociology, or in educational philosophy or something. We're not looking for a lot of sort of very elaborate language. We're looking for something which is academic, but clear and crisp and straightforward. So the style of the language, I think, is really important. But I'll give you some more tips about how you can find out about the style, because that, I think, bears on our colleagues' comments here. Okay, so yes or no. Sorry, go on.
Just to add to this one, something very important, beware of abbreviations.
Oh,
because many people take for granted that everybody knows all the abbreviation, and even when they talk in front of somebody that is a novice, and everybody is afraid to ask what is it.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
If it's in writing, it's terrible.
Yeah. Yes. And sometimes people in articles, that's such a good point, thank you. People use so many abbreviations or so many acronyms, and they explain them once, which is good practice, but then they use so many of them that the text ends up looking like, we call it alphabet soup. You know, I don't know if children in Hebrew have soup when they're little with letters in it, but we do. We have alphabet soup in Britain. And the articles look like alphabet soup. You're quite right. You know, abbreviations are so difficult to read when they're not familiar to you. So cut back on abbreviations would be a good thing. Yes.
I'm just disappointed that I'm not sure I understand. If the article is written well, it has a new data engine, it's good. But not the language, but the style. It has footnotes, here is a parenthesis in the bibliography. It isn't the article style, not in language, but in structure. Will it be a setback or?
Okay, depends how heavy it is.
You have to change from article.
Yeah.
Usually the first article, the first journal you send, they send it back to you and just
Okay.
fitting.
Yes. And the main questions there, I think, are: is the article suitable for this journal? And is the abstract clear? So, yeah, I mean, if it was really bad, if it had the 22 footnotes and, you know, the 25 references for every idea cited, then I think it probably would go back on just on those kind of details. But with guidance, with an indication of why it was judged not to be appropriate. So, yes or no decision, does it go to reviewers? Now, if it goes to reviewers with JET, we send it out to 3 reviewers. Some journals I know use 2. The problem with 2 is that you sometimes get this kind of split where one says, you know, at the most extreme form, one says this is wonderful, publish it as it is, and the other one says this is not a good article, don't publish it at all, you know, and I'm sure you've seen those. So we try and use 3 to give a balance. Of course, that doesn't always work. Sometimes the 3 have slightly different opinions, okay, in which case that's a different scenario. But so here are the kind of questions we use as we go through the second review. Now, this is where colleagues here would come in. So we then send it out to 3 reviewers, okay, and we would be sending it out to somebody who knows this area of teacher education very well, and preferably somebody who knows this national context very well. So we're trying to kind of cover all our bases to see if this is a good article and if it's an accurate article. So what new knowledge does it contribute to the field? Is it original? Does it have significance for the readership in general? Now, in an international journal, you're pitching articles out there to people who come from all over the world. Now, I really enjoy reading articles that come from very different countries and very different systems from my own. That, I think, is very rich. But I also need to know something about what the general implications of this article are, how it sits within the landscape of teacher education generally. So because it's an international journal, the readership is international, so the significance has got to be international. And that's sometimes very hard when you've got a local or national study that is quite small scale. And again, we can talk about that towards the end and how you sort of pitch that, basically. Are the general lines of argument clear and well communicated? So sometimes, I must admit, I get to the end of a really well-written article and I think, what's this about? You know, I don't actually know what this person is arguing. To be honest, sometimes I write quite a lot of text and then I stop and I think, I don't know what I mean here. I don't know what I'm trying to say, you know, because I use writing, I sort of think through my fingers, so I'm quite capable of typing a lot. And then I read it and I think, this isn't clear to me, you know, let alone to another reader. But the lines of the argument clear and well communicated. Is there a high level of scholarship? Is it generative, that word I used before, does it build on previous literature? And is there an appropriate theoretical or conceptual framework? And that's the issue I referred to before. Is it founded on good empirical evidence? If it's an empirical paper, and of course not always, but does it come from a robust research design? Now that's important because I can't tell how good the research design is unless I have detail about the research design. Not too much detail, because otherwise it'll swamp the paper, but enough so I can tell whether this is robust or not. And then, is it well balanced in terms of all elements of the study? Okay. Now, if I was to say to you that you know the format of an article, basically an introduction, a literature base, a literature review, and perhaps a theoretical or conceptual framework woven into it, a methodology and methods section, findings and conclusions. So let's say, you know, at the simplest, there are 5 sections. Which of those sections do you think get squeezed out in most articles? Just turn to each other and say what you think. Which of those 5 sections gets squeezed out? Which gets squeezed out? Okay. Just have a talk for a minute on why and so on. Said here. Any other offerings? Methodology. Okay, no. No. The findings and, yeah.
The findings, but also the merge between the different parts.
Right.
I think that's what I find. Sometimes I received articles in which the literature did not capture exactly the terms that were discussed later. So the merge, the fit between the different
Right. Okay. Yes, absolutely. So the balance, the fit, the crafting between the different elements is so important. That is where I think so much of the skill of writing a good journal article comes, that people are actually not getting the crafting of this article right. You know, they're not actually thinking, this isn't just me putting down these ideas, this is a small amount of words, it has to be really well crafted. You know, people say that if you write a book, an academic book, it's more like writing a novel. You've got a lot of space, you've got a lot of time in which to expand your ideas, and there's usually a little bit of room for you to do some elaboration or some, you know, extra additional things or explanations. A journal article is more like a short story. Every sentence counts, almost down to every word counts. Short story writing is supposed to be the most difficult form of fiction writing. Journal articles, I think, are one of the most difficult forms of academic writing because of that crafting, because you've got to get the balance right. Now, in my experience, this might be different across different journals, but in my experience, what happens is people write really confidently in terms of an introduction. They write confidently around a literature review, perhaps because they're drawing on PhD study or previous reading or research or scholarship. They write confidently around the research methods, and sometimes at much too much length. The findings get a lot of space, often an awful lot of space, and then what gets cut down is the discussion and the conclusion. So it's not unusual for me to read a really good article and be reading through it and thinking, wow, this is really great. And then I realise I must be 7/8 of the way through, and suddenly it's like, you know how children write stories and they say, you know, and then she walked home and then she lived happily ever after, the end. You know, and it's almost like that, where you go, the end, that's it. You know, and you sort of fall off a cliff. Yes?
I've noticed a real problem where sometimes you get an article that is really, it seems really excellent, technically. They follow all the rules and the instructions very carefully, but then they forget that they must connect it to the field, must connect it to examples. Yes. So you have something that is brilliant technically and is empty of spirit.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
absolutely.
Even though it's objective and even in quantitative.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I love that phrase. It's that connecting it to the field at the end. Whatever the field or the landscape of teacher education you're addressing, it's got to go back to connect into the field. It's some people you'll see and later, it's the kind of so what about this study. So what? Very interesting study, but so what? What's the significance? What does it mean to people who work in teacher education? Yes, you wanted to ask a question.
Would you put the recommendation within the conclusion or have a separate section?
Yeah, recommendations, I think it depends what sort of paper it is and how extensive the recommendations are, but they certainly need to be there, whether it's at the end of the discussion or into the conclusion. Yeah, they definitely, some sort of action orientation in an applied discipline like ours is usually there. Not always absolutely every time, because these articles vary so much, but, you know, in general. Right, now let me just go on and I will show you some of the things that I know I write over and over again as a reviewer, that I know Peter Gilroy writes over and over again, and I suspect those of you who review would write over and over again. So the arguments are not clear. In other words, I don't know what you're trying to say. You're not communicating clearly to me as the reader. And of course, that doesn't mean that the writer is not communicating clearly to him or herself. In fact, almost certainly the writer understands this completely. You know, this is the writer's work. So they understand it beautifully. But do I understand it? No, I have to say I don't understand what you're really trying to say here. I might understand what kind of study you've done, but I don't understand what your arguments are. Evidence doesn't support the arguments, and the evidence, of course, might be the empirical findings, or it might be the scholarship of the field. It doesn't support the arguments. It's over-focused on either the local or the national context. So there's too much. Sorry.
Is it possible to send them the...
Yeah, Mikhail has it. Mikhail has it, yes, yes, yeah, yes, yeah. Sorry, I thought people knew that. Okay. No problem, yeah. Okay, so it's over-focused on national or local context, and that's very often where your point about all the acronyms and the alphabet soup comes in. The paper fades away. The discussion section and or the conclusion are not really completed. You know, they're the smallest parts of the paper, and they should be arguably, if not the longest, then heading towards the longest. The literature review is weak, so it's too short, it's too long. Often I suspect that people take a bit of their PhD thesis or a book and put it into a paper, and again, it does what our colleague over here said, it puts the paper out of balance, because the literature review is so long and very leisurely, you know, and there's lots of what we call she said, he said. You know, so-and-so said this, and so-and-so said that, but so-and-so said this, and then they said that, and, you know, it's very long, very leisurely. Or there's some major work missing. So last week I reviewed a paper, not for JET, for another journal. It was about teaching in teacher education. It came from a country that I won't name, but is quite a way away from here. And it said there was no literature on how teacher educators saw teaching. So you can imagine, it's sort of like, I don't believe this. You know, there's a whole massive amount of literature across the world on how teacher educators see teaching and what kind of teaching they do. And that was all missing from this paper. So I said farewell to that one. Either there isn't a theoretical or conceptual framework, or that framework is over-detailed. The research design is either not clear, so people miss out on crucial bits like why this sampling strategy, why choose this sample, what sort of ethics did you use? You know, if you're doing this with your students, you need to tell me if you're a researcher, teacher, educator. Or there's so much detail that, again, that swamps the paper, and the research methods is usually an easy section to write. So when people aren't feeling confident, they do a great big long research methods section, and it swamps the crafting of the paper. Presentation of findings is in effect either just large chunks of data, big direct quotes, or it's huge tables. You know, I saw a paper recently in which there were 12 incredibly detailed statistical tables for one small paper. And I also had a paper recently where over half of the paper length was direct quotes from qualitative research. So again, you can see this sort of huge effect on the paper. It doesn't relate to international issues, so we're an international journal. We must have something that will mean something, have some significance internationally, even if it's a local study or a national study. And again, the significance for international readers is not clearly signalled. Okay, so those are the things we write over and over. Now I'm going to give you, I will come back to the questions, but I've done a lot of talking. My voice needs a rest. Would you see what you want to pick up from what I've just said? What would you like to pick up? What questions would you like to ask? So just 2 minutes to talk to one another, okay? We'll have some more time for questions towards the end, but questions or comments that people would like to raise. And Tal's going to bring
אני
the
רק
microphone.
מבקש, תשאלו למיקרופון, כי אנחנו מקליטים את זה, ואחרי זה יש לנו בעיה לשמוע אתכם. אז בואי תתחילי.
Well, it's most recently a colleague and I experienced something that was really upsetting, because we've written a well-done theoretical section, and the editor sent it back and he said, well, we don't want the theoretical part because people today are tired of reading that, and we want only the practitioner view for the teachers. How do you deal with that? Eventually, he made it a unique online article, but he actually took out most of the theoretical part.
Oh, okay. That must have been upsetting. So, can I just ask, could you have known that from looking at the journal?
Well, actually, they have different sections. Part of them are only research work, part of them are practitioner works, and so on and so forth. And another upsetting things that they lock quite a bit of that for people if they are not paying membership.
Oh, okay.
Even if you have written that and you're not a member, you don't get it.
Right, okay, yes. I mean, different journals have different practices, and it's not always possible to predict what's going to happen to you, even if you do all of these things. And we wish that we could all have a magic formula, but I think there are some unusual reviewers out there. Now, I'm British, so if I say unusual, that means very strange, very peculiar, because we go in for understatement, you know. So there are some very quirky reviewers out there who will say some very unusual, strange things. Sometimes I think some of us have had the experience of reviewers who say things that we don't agree with. And sometimes there are decisions made on papers which seem very harsh. So I think that sounds very harsh, and I'm sorry you had that experience, but it sounds as if at least you got some sort of publication out of it after some pain, basically. Other comments or questions that people would like to make?
Okay. I want to ask about the English. How do you suggest to deal with American English and the UK English?
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
First of all, there are spell checkers on each computer, or you can put spell checkers on your computer which will put it into American spelling or into English spelling. We do get, as a British-based journal, we ask for English. Yeah. Proper English, we would call it. But sometimes we get American English spelling, and we usually ignore that because the copy editors at Taylor Francis will change it for us. Okay, so we'll ignore it. But what we can't ignore, so if something comes in, we spell program PROGRAMME, you know, and Americans spell it with just one M. That doesn't matter. But if we do get something that is very American, say in England we don't have elementary schools and we don't have junior high. So if somebody says, I'm preparing teachers to teach junior high, what age are they? We don't know, you know, and most people in Europe would have no idea because we don't use the American education system. So that's just a very simple example of how you would not want to have, you'd want that explained. You know, what age children are in a junior high school would need explaining for a European audience. And there are some examples of American English that are considered very rude in English. So gotten, for example, is got and gotten are sort of like, oh, horrible words. But you'd rarely see that. I mean, the style is not usually a problem with because academic style travels across the Atlantic. Lots of things don't, but academic English would normally travel. And as I say, we would accept the spellings and then go, we'll correct them later. So.
Because we got this comment
about
our paper.
Okay.
And we didn't know what to do with it. Because
okay.
we don't know exactly we don't know exactly the differences between English, this English.
Okay.
So you suggest to do it with the computer?
I would suggest use an English spell check, an English spell checker, and make sure that any American specific terms are translated into English. Yes, the Oxford Dictionary has both. Yes,
every word. To every word, I can't.
As there aren't that many differences in spelling, you'll be glad to hear. No. Okay, question over here, please.
It's not a question, it's more of a remark. I would like to touch upon the situation in which you send a manuscript and it comes with a rejection, sometimes with an explanations, and in some cases without. That is so, I mean, it gives you hard feelings. 6 years ago, I was in a situation where I received 3 rejections in a row, and I decided to quit writing. I would in such situation, I was lucky enough that the next letter was with receiving not only the paper but also with the prize. So only then I felt that it is not that disastrous. So from then on, I realized that it take me 2 days. I'm in a mourn. I wish in a situation that I know that it's very difficult. Then I gradually realized that when I read it again and again, and then I correct, and it never occurred to me that the reviewers' remarks, they are always so to the point that we need to develop not only the skills how to write, but also the emotional competence how to face with rejection.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, resilience in a hard world is very important. Yes, your colleague there.
Along with the same line, I must say that I myself have avoided sending articles to British journals because I didn't know if, because of the political situation, they might reject it. Can you make a comment about that? Do you suppose that all British journals are clean in terms of review and professional review, or do they have other considerations? I know that it's a very difficult question, but...
You mean political?
Yeah, I personally don't know of any British journal that would automatically reject a paper from
not automatically, but
an Israeli context, and I don't know of anyone who would deal with it unprofessionally. And as I said, the policy of my particular journal would be that a paper that came from Israel would always go to at least one reviewer who knew the context here. But I couldn't comment in detail for...
because of recent boycotts and things like that.
Yes, I would say no, but I'm sorry if you've had experiences.
No, I never tried.
Opposite,
I never sent. So because I didn't know whether or not.
It does depend on the editors. Yeah. I mean, basically, editors are really powerful people in this situation. I can say, if you sent it to Jet, hand on heart, I can say there would be no issues at all. I can, maybe certainly speak about the European Teacher Education Journal, because that has strong links to MOFET. Beyond that, I would expect people to deal with it professionally, academic to academic.
Okay, thank you.
Expect. Right, okay, let's carry on, because we have a certain amount of time left. I will leave spaces for questions as we go through, and remember, you will get copies of this through Mikhail. But first of all, you won't be surprised to hear me say this, but writing an article is about crafting. It's about crafting your arguments. So it's not just about writing what you want to write. If you think about this short story form, this journal article, which, you don't have that many words, you've got to think about the significance of most of those words quite hard. You've got to craft it across all those elements of the paper, and you've got to communicate those arguments clearly to your reader. As I say, I still think that is probably the most difficult thing. I mean, very, very experienced writers in here, I don't know, might want to contribute in this later, but I think that's still really hard, even when you've got a lot of publications out there, that you need to communicate those arguments. You need to keep checking as you go through the writing that what you're doing is communicating very clearly, and you're building up those arguments with reference to each part of the article. So this is where the crafting comes in. It's not just about the technical stuff, and you're quite right. You can find technically wonderful articles, written in the most beautiful style, all in English, beautiful spelling, and there's still something missing from them. That spirit of the article is still not there. But the crafting thing is something to remember if you're, you know, if you find you struggle with articles, or you get, you know, a run of negative feedback. And by the way, on your point about rejection, I used to work with probably one of the 5 most eminent educational sociologists in Britain. And she did a lot of mentoring with us as early career researchers. And I remember one day we were talking to her about rejection and how painful it was. And she said, yes, I know, that still happens to me. And we were horrified. We were surprised. To be honest, we didn't really believe her. So the next day she brought in all her rejection notices and she plastered them on her door for us to see, which was so brave of her. And she did. She had so many rejections, and not just when she was in the middle of her career, but right towards the end of her career, when she was very famous. And people writing must have been able to guess who she was because, you know, her name, her work, her ideas were so well done. So even when it said author, you know, such and such a date, people must have known, but they were still coming back and sometimes doing really mean things to her, you know, really unkind criticisms. So it happens to the best of us. But this thing about crafting, I think, is really, really important. Now, again, I'm not going to ask you to do this because we're going to run out of time if we do it. But this is something I ask all our early career researchers to do and all of my doctoral students to do as they come up to the end of the doctoral process. So it's called the media test. And in England, we have, in the UK, I should say, we have a radio programme first thing in the morning called the Today programme. And it's a sort of a big radio programme, you probably remember it, where there are some very, very fierce interviewers. And the interviewers have a very narrow time slot, and they often have politicians on there, and the politicians try and talk, you know how politicians do, and they talk round and round and round, and they don't answer questions straight. But these interviewers pounce on them and make them answer the questions. And sometimes they have academic researchers on there, usually of things in medicine or things in, you know, neurobiology or neuroscience or something. But sometimes they have education researchers, and this is more or less what they ask them. They say, what is this research about? Quick answer. What did you find out? Quick answer. What's the significance of these findings? What do they mean? And then what are the implications of this research? Okay, in other words, what's going to happen? What are the recommendations from this research? And most of those interview slots take between 3 and 4 minutes. And you've got a really kind of wolfish, you know, really wolfish interviewer. And you can't do lots of, well, it's sort of, it's kind of about people in teacher education and how they learn and what they learn and so on. You've got to be really succinct, okay? You can't do what we say in English, waffle, you know, talk round and round and round and round and round. You've got to be clear, you've got to be focused, and you've got to be able to describe that research quickly and succinctly for somebody else. So I always think if you can do that before you start writing the article, you're probably going to write a better article or a PhD chapter or whatever it is, because you know what your key arguments are going to be. And if you are somebody, people write in different ways. I mean, I do know some people who have the entire sort of paragraph mapped out in their head before they start to write. Is anybody in here like that? It's in your head? No? Yes? No? Yes? Sometimes no? Okay. I think there are very different writing styles, but particularly if you're like me, if you write through your fingers, if you write and your ideas come through as you type, then you need this kind of technique at your fingertips, I would say, because it'll really help you stay on message, as they say in the media. Yes?
Coming from both education and journalism and communication, the best recommendation is to write to yourself what we call a leader, not abstract, but
Okay, that's an interesting technique. Perhaps you could show that to colleagues at another time. But yes, a leaderboard, you call it, don't you? Sort of what's the leader for this article, and then what are the sort of sub-themes coming out of it? I like that idea from somebody in journalism and education. Okay, but as I say, I was going to get you to practice that, but if you've got a colleague who could listen to you do that with an article you have in preparation, or if you want to practice that on some of your research students, then see what they do with it. Okay, scaling up and scaling down writing. I think we all need to learn how to do scaling up and scaling down more effectively, because we all engage in lots of different kinds of outputs. Now, in our system, as I say, we are now in a situation where international peer-reviewed research articles are the name of the game, more or less. So that's where we usually end up. But I think very few people actually go straight into that. I think going straight up to that level is sometimes very hard. So one of the things I do is scale up. I will do conference papers, and then I will scale them up, or I'll do a lot of sort of talk pieces in professional national publications. Scale up. Okay, so if I've got a conference paper, then that would improve it. Yes, sorry, scaling it up, improving it. Yes, so improve it, make it better. Yeah, so adapt it, make it better, change it. So conference paper to international journal paper would be one way of kind of upping, because conference papers need to be good, but they're not always rigorously peer-reviewed in the same way as a journal article would be. We have lots of professional journals, outputs, that we can use. We can write for the press, we can write for online journals, we can write for in-house journals that the university has. So I might do something for a professional audience or for a national audience first. So last month we had a big summit about the terrible things that are happening in teacher education in England at the moment. And I spoke with a colleague, and we are now writing that up for a national product. Almost certainly we will take that into an international journal article. And by the time we've finished, it will look so different, because the audience is so different, that there's no question of self-plagiarism or anything like that. The classic example of scaling down, of taking a big product and splitting it up, is a PhD. So you've finished your doctorate. I always think if people don't publish from their doctorates, it's verging on criminal. I always kind of say, oh, please publish from your doctorate. You know, I know you're fed up with it. I know you've been working on it for 4 years or 5 years or 6 years or however. But please publish from it. And there, you've got the huge document, you've got the kind of book size, and you've got to carve it up, which I actually think is really hard, but it's so worth doing. The other huge document you might have is if you've done a big funded research project, then you've got a project report, which is everything that happened in that project, and then you cut it down into journal articles. So it's kind of scaling up, so making something higher level, if you like, or taking a big product and scaling it down, you know, dividing it up is basically what I do. But I think still the key features of the sort of the article, the journal article, remain the same. I don't think those change, whether you're scaling up or you're scaling down. Perhaps because it's a long time since I did my doctorate, I find it easier to scale up now than I do to scale down. But I will do both because, like many of you, I have publication targets. I have things that I have to show that I'm engaging in. So both. Yes?
Scaling down would be an example of if you
Yes. So then you would actually scale it down and also recommend to involve storytelling. Interesting. I think you could probably, with your media background, you could probably do a very interesting session for this audience on how to do that kind of storytelling for media audiences, which would be very valuable. Okay, so this is me. I just thought I'd show you this. I don't think there's anything new here that most of you don't already know and would already do. But what I would do, and what I advise our early career researchers to do, is to see their work going from conference abstract to working paper to conference paper to journal article. Now, I would say as well, we've got research mentoring structures that come in here. So we wouldn't, in our system, we wouldn't leave people to write alone. But I always say, think about a journal article from the beginning. It doesn't have to be an international journal, but think about which target journal is this article going to go to. Be realistic. If you're just starting your PhD, unless you are, unless you have the brain power of an Albert Einstein, you are not going to be able to pitch right up there to teachers and teacher education, for example, in the American journal. That's not going to happen. So let's be realistic. Think about the journal, think about the suitability, talk to your mentor if you're not sure, and find out the requirements for this journal. Now, you remember our colleague here said, think about what the journal looks like. I always say, go into the journal you think you want, find 2 or 3 articles in the broad area of your study, read them for the content, and remember, journals love it when you reference things that have been published in their own journal before. And they tend to get a little bit cross and cranky if you miss out things that have been published in their journal before, because they think if you're sending your paper to their journal, you'll actually be interested in that journal. So go in there, read those articles, and make sure that you bring them into your own article, but also look at the structure of each article. Now, not just how it's crafted, but what the type or style of writing is and how the arguments within it are woven together. Because those articles, as you said, those articles that are in the journal are articles which have been accepted. So those are ones that editors and reviewers liked. So what can you learn from those? What's the level of writing? What does the style look like? One of the issues around style is often, do you write in the first person singular? Can you use I? Are there papers in there using I? Or do you notice that most of the writing is in the third person? Are they mostly empirical papers? Or are there some theoretical papers in there? Are they discussion pieces or opinion pieces? Or again, is it mostly empirical studies? And usually you can see what sort of types of paper are favoured by this journal and what the finished articles look like in terms of style as well as substance. So I think your strategy is absolutely spot on. Go into that journal, know it. And if you can, try and write for journals that you know really well. So this is what we encourage our early career researchers to do. They've got a conference abstract, they split it up, and that immediately gives them the structure of the article. Because this is, I'll come back to this one in a minute, but it's very formulaic. And following up our colleague's point here, it's possible to write a technically wonderful paper following this formula that really means very little and has very little significance. But if you look at most empirical research journals, this is what the structure looks like. It's that 5-part structure that we talked about before. And it's amazing how heavily replicated that is
So when we, at my university, we're teaching people how to write articles, we say, okay, you know, by all means experiment perhaps later, but let's try this. This is what these different areas are about. Okay? So fit your conference abstract into that. This is obviously for empirical studies, but let's have a look at that. So there's your formula. Oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong way, aren't I? My Hebrew reading is improving a lot, you can see. Amazing. So, and you can see those steps there. They're all about the same arguments I was forwarding to you. Clarifying the research focus and the question. Communication, communication, communication. Clarifying arguments, using that media technique, the media test I showed you. Use those arguments as guidelines for the article. Keep coming back to say, you know, am I actually on message here? There's another thing from journalism. Am I on message? Am I giving this argument here? And then start filling in parts of the article as you go along. And the last thing is, don't overwrite. Again, if you are one of these people who, like me, writes quite easily, but not always with huge, deep meaning, then you probably find it easy to write quite long sections. And that, I think, is quite tempting, but not always very useful. So going through and actually writing to length helps, and having a guideline length. You know, you can't have more than about, in an article of 7,000 words long, you can't have any more than an absolute maximum of about 1,000 for a research design section. That would be totally maximum. You can't have much more than 1,000 for a literature review. You know? Well, it's sort of basic mathematics. Take your target length and cut it up, and think about how much you need for your discussion and your conclusions, because that's going to be the real meat of it. Okay? And then my last thing really is about critical friends. Again, I think because we're all very anxious about our writing, because it's personal, and when it's criticised, or critiqued we should say, it feels horrible, we sometimes tend to keep it to ourselves too much, I think. And we don't admit how much labour, academic labour, goes into this, and how much pain goes into it, even when you are very experienced as a writer. So we draft and we redraft and we redraft. And sometimes we bang our heads on the table in despair because it's very hard. But do we use critical friends or mentors enough? I'm not sure if we do, especially in the later stages when you've got good drafts. Do you show your work to anybody before it goes off to the journal? Or do you rely on the journal, which may or may not have good, kind reviewers, or, you know, to give you your feedback? I'd say, really, you should be using your critical friends and you should be using your mentors to do that. Okay, so some key messages to finish. I'll leave those up there and ask for questions and so on, because we've got about 5 minutes left if there are any questions or comments that people would like to add.
After specifying all the labor that is necessary, it's a good idea to finish with the sweet feeling when the paper is accepted.
Yes.
It is so rewarding.
Yes, yes, thank you for that. I think that sweet feeling when you finally get success is immensely important, isn't it? That makes it all worthwhile, the name in print and the feeling of success at the end and the feeling of membership. Yeah.
That are of the utmost importance, and it's concise, precise, consistent.
Concise, precise, and consistent. Thank you very much. That sounds very, very useful. Excellent. Concise, precise, and consistent. Okay? Yeah.
Do you know the kind of contents
publishing the journals. And when I'm so happy that somebody knows my, paid attention to my writing. Knows my work.
Yes, yeah.
Knows my work. And I'm I'm going inside that mail, and suddenly I noticed that in order to publish in that article, in that journal, I should pay that and that amount. Do you know this kind of...
Yeah, I do know there are journals who charge for publication in their journals. I personally think that's unethical. It may be the way of the future, but I personally find that Yeah, I personally find that, as I say, unethical. But it does happen in some disciplines quite a lot. In education, not so much at the moment, but the problem is that I think it might grow. Yeah, and you really need to think hard about that, I think. Yes?
Does it matter if the data
was taken years ago, but is still relevant? For instance, if I recall your lecture this morning, I have a lot of data coming from interviews that I did with field mentors in school. And it's still very, very actual, but I did it 10 years ago. Is it still, can I use it? Because to be honest, I didn't do it 2 months ago.
Everything is permissible in writing, unless you are clear and state it outright, out front, what you're doing. Meaning that you have to state that between the years this and this, the data was collected in this and these places. And then, because of whatever, personal reasons or other reasons, it was not analyzed. However, and then state that, conversations with other colleagues kept mentioning how relevant the data is to the situation in Israel and so on. And then you decided, giving the background and the rationale and the dates out front, that's part of the ethics of publishing. No. In the article itself, because then people will read it and they have to understand that the data was collected between these years and they have to take it into account. And then they have also to consider your rationale to see, is it convincing? I mean, are they convinced that it's not just because you are lazy and therefore it's not updated and not relevant anymore? So I think that at least whenever I am writing something, I make sure that the audience, meaning the readers, not only the reviewers, but the readers know all my considerations. I mean, why I did it, when I did it, what happened. I mean, put it out there.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. I'm going to remind you about how good it is.
Teacher educators identity and professional development, and today she will be talking to us about publishing in peer-reviewed journals. So I hope we all benefit from the workshop.
Thank you, Nate, and thank you again, everybody, for inviting me here. What I'm going to do is a relatively informal workshop, and as you'll see, I'm going to base it on my experience of both editing and reviewing, and then writing for international peer-reviewed journals. So, as you know, journals come in many, many different forms and many, many different shapes. They have many different focuses, and the professional international divide, if you like, between journals is perhaps a very important one to consider. So I will talk about those international journals, and I'll talk about peer-reviewed journals. Now, from there, we can spend some time towards the end talking about other kinds of journals. But basically, I'm going to start with journals which traditionally would be pitching to a very wide and international audience. But I think you'll see as I talk through that many of the things are the same for national journals. They're the same for professional journals rather than academic journals. They might be the same for non-peer-reviewed journals, but the same sort of threads will go through, basically. But just to say that all of the things that I will talk about initially are to do with international journals. I'm also going to ask you to do some talking about your research, either the actual research you're engaged in at the moment, on which you hope to publish, or some research that is in your head for the future, if you're not actually engaged in a research study at the moment. This is going to work best if you're not sitting next to somebody who already knows all about your research inside out, basically. So if you are finding that you're sitting right next to somebody who already knows all your research, you might, when we start the activity, just want to move around slightly. Okay? So, publishing in teacher education journals. I thought it would be useful just to start by talking about the kind of experience that I bring to publishing. And this is a number of different fora. For me, as for many of you, I know, this kind of essentially free pro bono work that we do for the journals is an important part of our research esteem. So I know people who are outside academic circles and outside academic publishing sometimes find this extraordinary, but basically we give our labour free to journals because we publish in them, we give them the material free, and then what's more, we come in and we do all the reviewing and the editorships and so on free. So it's quite extraordinary, really. If you work in other types of publishing, you actually get paid for writing things. You get paid for doing the editing and the reviewing and so on, but not in academia. We do it for esteem. So my experience is I am the deputy editor for a journal, for the Journal of Education for Teaching. So this is JET, and that sometimes gets confused with an American journal, which is called the Journal of Teacher Education, JTE. There aren't so many words that you can use to describe a journal in teacher education, which is why I suspect that the American one almost copied our name when it was first set up some time ago. But we are JET. Yes, this is Professor Peter Gilroy is the editor, and I'm now the deputy editor.
I'm a reviewer.
You're a reviewer. Thank you very much indeed. Excellent. Thank you so much. People who are reviewers are very, very popular with us. And I'll talk a bit about reviewing in a moment and how important it is. But then I also sit on the editorial boards of some other journals, and I've listed some of them there. Mostly teacher education, but not only teacher education, some general education ones. And then you'll see that I do quite a bit of reviewing. So I review for all of the journals in which I'm on the board or I'm the deputy editor, but I also do some additional reviewing as well. Okay. And I think I'd say, I don't know what my two friends here who do such sterling work for JET will think, but I think I've learnt as much about writing through reviewing as I've ever done through the writing process itself. Incredibly helpful, I would say. Okay, and then of course I also write for journals because, like many of you, I have publication pressures around being published, and certainly in the system that I work in, publishing in peer-reviewed international journals is the highest ranking form of research output, much higher than books, which always seems very strange to people outside academia, and of course in some ways is very sad, but the journal articles, because of the heavy peer review process, have taken over from books in terms of the weight that they have for esteem in general. Not all books are outweighed by all journal articles, but I suspect it is because the figures around journal articles and the peer review processes are much more transparent. They're much easier for our funding councils and our colleges or our universities to see the quality of a journal article quickly than it is to see the quality of a book or a book chapter. Which isn't to say that I don't think we shouldn't still be publishing in books, we shouldn't still be publishing books, or we shouldn't be publishing book chapters, but we do need to be aware that in this kind of very competitive research environment, this is the writing for the journals is often what counts and what will get your work out there and to the widest audience. You know, I'm sure your colleges, like my university, have these electronic access systems which mean you can access things very quickly and very easily. So another reason, if you like, to actually put your work out there fairly quickly. So, as I say, I write for journals. I have been writing for journals for 20 years now, and I'm still learning. And I'm sure that's the same for many of you who are experienced reviewers and writers. You're still learning about this experience of how you write for education journals. So please don't regard what I'm saying as anything about expert and expertise. This is actually about a learning process that for me is still very much ongoing. So I've learned to really dig into what the journal's mission and focus is about. I've learned to say, this is my target journal, and this is what I'm going to write to. And I realized when I was earlier in my career, I didn't always do that. I used to think I'm writing a journal article, but I wouldn't target it. I think the third one down is perhaps one of the hardest things. So to convey meanings to others. So I often write about teacher education and teacher educators in particular, and the articles are read by people who might not be specialists in that very niche area of teacher education. So I've got to be able to write in general terms. I quite often write about what's happening in the UK, but I've got to be able to project out beyond that, which took me a while. Fourth one down, to craft articles as works of art, and I'll use that word craft again, and I'm using it deliberately, but actually to create articles. And I'll talk again because I think this is really skilled. It involves structuring arguments at the levels of the article as a whole, and then structuring within each subsection and each paragraph within it. And then I've learned to write in my own voice and to use it as appropriate within language that is good academic language but isn't over complicated. And sometimes I know my very, very early career researchers, you know, who just finished their doctorates, what they try and do to impress their readers and impress the reviewers is they write immensely long, complicated sentences using very grand words. And I try to say that isn't necessary in education research, and particularly in teacher education research. You don't need to write these great long sentences that ramble round and round and round and round and around and so on. And you don't need to use this sort of sometimes rather inflated language. Sometimes you can just write common sense and write it in good academic English. Okay, so there's me. This is what I'm still learning through reviewing and editing and writing. And I had, quite recently, I had an article back from a journal that I was writing for, and I went through all these kind of processes in trying to write it, and it still came back with major amendments. So it still said, this isn't right, this isn't right, this isn't right. So I do know what those of you who are trying this process are going through. Right, okay, I'm going to ask you to do a small activity now, preferably talking to the person next to you. I would like you to communicate your research, to think about your current work. How would you introduce it? And who is your audience? Who do you want to be reading this? Are my first two questions. And then, going on, what is the landscape of teacher education research into which your work fits? And the landscape is about how your work contributes to, how your research, that should say, contributes to your own work. So is it part of your own work? Is it something separate from your own work? Doesn't matter, but how does it do that? And then, does it relate to teacher education? How does it relate to teacher education in Israel? And how does it relate internationally? Okay, now, we're not going to have time to do any of those questions in huge depth, but if you can find somebody on your table next to you who does not know your research, could you try and introduce and summarize the research you do and say what your audience is, and then have a go at the second set of questions. Okay? Right, I'll give you 5 minutes. Okay, take it in turns to talk and to listen.